guys about your judgment and will. I want to share with you some self-evident truths that I found. Things that kill should be rejected. Things that intrude on our civil liberties should be rejected. Things that cause loneliness should be rejected. Things that cause pennilessness, poorness should be rejected. Things that cause illness should be rejected. And things that cause aimlessness should be rejected. Eating genetically altered foods is a harmful practice that is dangerous to your health. Therefore, we cannot eat GMO food in good conscience. Did you know that you, all of you, are taking part in a worldwide food experiment without your knowledge? In the United States and Canada, there are no laws requiring manufacturers to label GM ingredients. So how can you and I decide whether or not we want to eat genetically altered foods? The thing is, most of us can't. GMOs are in everything you buy at the supermarket. From apples to corn, they all contain genetically modified products. Even things like soda contain genetically altered substances. Milk has been shown to contain traces of either medicines, illegal antibiotics used on farms, hormones, including genetically engineered bovine growth hormone, and praise God that we don't drink cows from milk, brothers and sisters. But something that isn't very surprising is that the #1 genetically altered food in the United States is soybeans. Now ask yourself, why is that so? Just ponder on that. Genetically altered foods have never had significant amounts of testing to establish whether or not they are safe for human consumption. First, they are never tested on humans before coming to market. They're usually tested on rats. And as you can see here, this right here would be a rat that consumed genetically altered corn and one that didn't. Now, obviously you can see which one is healthy and which not. I'll let you decide. There have been requests made by independent research groups that have been denied to test patent-protected genetically altered substances. Basically, the only people allowed to test for the safeness of a product is the company producing it. If they don't have something to hide, why is this regulation like this? Recently, a court ruled that one of the GM companies, Monsanto, which you might be familiar with, that they had to release their experimental findings whether or not their GM corn was safe for human consumption to a research foundation for review. What the foundation found was astonishing. The experiments conducted were found to be lacking in diligence and not thorough enough to conclude safety for human consumption. You can imagine what kind of testing is done. Simply think about what kind of results they will publish. You are the guinea pig in this experiment. For example, in the 1980s, a genetically engineered form of L-tryptophan killed 37 people, and things still haven't been changed in the regulatory processes since then. Things are approved just as easy as they were back then and now. There's no further protection for you or me, the consumer. On top of all of that, the FDA, the government body that is supposed to protect you from the big bad companies out there, ruled that genetically altered organisms are essentially the same as naturally produced organisms, and that they all should be safe for consumption. Just an interesting fact, many of the heads of the FDA have been CEOs or consulting managers of some of the biggest agribusiness companies. This man right here has served on the board of Monsanto, and he was recently made by President Obama as the top advisor to the FDA. Now, just think about that for a second. What kind of motives does this guy have? Is he working for you and me, or for the big companies out there that produce these products. Inadequate government regulation on biotech companies claim that government regulatory bodies will protect consumers. However, DDT, the pesticide that was linked to destruction of the environment and also being very toxic to animals and humans alike, phthalimide, and L-tryptophan, the case that happened in the 1980s, were all approved by British and US regulators with tragic results. The fact is that these regulators don't have you and me in mind. They have big business, big farms, and the government in mind, not the people, not your health. GMOs have been linked to many diseases. 1, cancer. 2, diabetes, allergies, liver disease, and even death. From here you can see that what Monsanto has to contribute to our society is money, Agent Orange, which was used in Vietnam to destroy the foliage of the forest so that they could fight the guerrilla combat without too much of a disadvantage. And many soldiers have died or have got a syndrome where they're really debilitated and are dependent on the government for their money and everything that they need to do. And that's the same company that produces most of the genetically altered crops throughout the world. In fact, most of the genetically engineered foods that are being produced today are produced by Monsanto, and they're over 60% of genetically altered crops are guided towards having herbicide resistance. And this company Monsanto, they make the herbicide Roundup, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. And most of their crops that they produce are genetically engineered to resist the effects of Roundup. This poses a significant problem for the environment because in the early 1990s and 1980s, they were saying that Roundup was biodegradable, but it has been found recently that Roundup is not biodegradable and remains in the soil and the water systems for over 10 years or longer. And this particular chemical causes genetic anomalies in all sorts of species, poisons the water table, and it also is going on the fact that most genetically altered foods are made to be resistant of this. It causes a dependence upon Roundup in farming. So they're spraying less amounts of the other brands, which is good, but they're doubling, even tripling in the amount of pesticide or herbicide they're spraying of Roundup. So this stuff is just accumulating in the soil and things like that. And not only that, when they introduce mutant genes into GMOs, these mutant genes can spread to other plants through cross-pollination. And what that does is it creates super weeds that are resistant to herbicides. So you can imagine these things, they're growing and they're spraying. And we're going to see these problems coming up in the next 10 to 15 years where Roundup is going to be pretty much useless. And the technology that they've come up with for Roundup-resistant corn and soy will be obsolete. You know how I mentioned that GMOs have been linked to allergies? Well, a popular genetically altered form of soy and corn are produced to have the gene of a what do you call it? A bacteria called Bacillus thuringiensis. And this specific bacteria produces a protein that um,